And with that, I would want to introduce our next speaker, who is with us from the UK, online, and Niklas Blomberg, with the title of your talk, Open Software in Life Science, Lessons from the COVID-19 Response. So a highly relevant topic of this time. Niklas is the director of Elixir, an international research organization for accessing and sharing European research data in genomics and other life sciences. He's based in Cambridge in the UK, but with strong connections to Gothenburg. Before joining Elixir, as the founding director, he worked 11 years at AstraZeneca in Mölndal, south of Gothenburg. And in his presentation, Niklas will talk about international sharing of research data in the ongoing pandemic, and how open source software and strong development communities drive the development of long-term sustainable code for scientific calculations. So it sounds to me really interesting, and I'm looking forward. And Niklas, most welcome to enter the stage virtually. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Helena, and thanks for inviting me today. It's really nice to be here. I wish I could be in Gothenburg, but this year is what it is. So I think we'll have to do with the video talk. But at least it's live, and I hope we'll have good questions afterwards. So as Helena said, I'm running an international organization for sharing life science data. In a way, you can think about this as enabling roaming for research data in Europe. How can researchers collaborate and let the data move freely between countries without too many encumbrances or too much red tape? We've been very active in the COVID-19 response, as you might imagine. And I'd like to share some of our experiences. And I thought the previous talk was really nice. And I will start with a bit of technology. But I think we will end in the same place, the importance of communities and the importance of helping bringing people together to build trust, to really make advancements. So yes, it's working. It's marvelous. So I'm not going to say a great deal about Elixir, the organization I'm running. We are an infrastructure. We're funded by 23 countries in Europe to help support researchers at universities and research institutes and other organizations. But I just wanted briefly to introduce you to the scale of what we're doing. So life science research and genome data is produced at hundreds and hundreds of institutes across Europe. And so what we want to do is to help people to collaborate. So it's a very large scale, many-to-many problem. How can researchers in Finland get access to genome sequenced from patients in Barcelona in Spain and so on? And that's of course the background to the work that we've done in the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm sure you all remember back in March, as the pandemic unfolded, coronavirus and COVID was essentially unknown. We didn't know very much about the virus. We did need to build a very rapid research response, and most countries, or all countries in Europe, set aside quite large funding for researchers to build up a sort of COVID-19 knowledge base and make sure that we could build a platform for research to help direct the epidemic response. Our small contribution in this was to look at the biomolecular data and to build up a portal where researchers could submit data and make sure that they could also access data from other researchers. So this was focused on virus genomes and also patient genotypes, trying to understand if there are any sort of genetic or inheritable determinants for the disease response. And of course, you need to have those genomes in the context of the sort of clinical response data and other serology data and other measurements from the patients and on the virus. And you also need, of course, to put it in the context of the large body of scientific knowledge, our big reference data sets. So we've done that and worked with national centers across Europe. So most countries have built up strong national centers to collect this data. Sweden is one of these. So the SciLife lab in Stockholm and Uppsala is running one of the Swedish centers with a sort of a Swedish COVID-19 data portal. And what we have tried to do is, and have done, is to bring all of this together into a European data portal, which is then also collaborating globally. So there is a similar effort in say, Canada or in Japan. And of course, we make sure that the data is exchanged. I'm not going to say a lot about the technology today, but I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges as the background to the main points later. And of course, there was a very rapidly growing amount of data. There was a lot of that data is also very sensitive. You can't put people's genomes on Facebook. You have to have adequate security measures and data sharing agreements and access agreements and all of that around the data. It's very scattered and disconnected. Not necessarily in a negative way, but efforts are being mounted in many different places at the same time, and we needed to bring them together. And of course, there is not one discipline that do all of this, and so we need to make sure that we exchange and help people to collaborate on the basis of the data, or that we sort of provide a foundation of data management and analysis that help these experts to collaborate. And so I think, and I think this brings me to the more core of my talk, is that we could do this because we had built up under many years a well-established network within the Elixir infrastructure. And I think I saw very strong parallels between what we've done and the previous talk from Volvo. It is about building connectors between the data and the technical infrastructure, but it really is about also building connections between the people to make sure that they can start to collaborate. You will not get a connection between Helsinki and Barcelona unless the people know how to collaborate and they work in similar systems. And most importantly, they have the trust where they can work together and they understand how they think they can work together. So it's trust between people, but it's also actually the trust between institutions. And so how do you capture that trust in well, trust between institutions you capture in very boring ways, don't you? It's guidelines, it's processes, it's liability management. But without that sort of institutionalized trust, there is no way you can exchange and share access controlled and sensitive data. We could mount a very rapid response thanks to some support from the European Commission. And so essentially we have brought together results from a large number of EC-funded projects, and with some extra rapid response money, we could essentially connect the work from all of these projects into a single portal. So I just want to give two sort of examples, maybe a little bit of flavor to what we've done, and to illustrate. So if you think back to January, February, March, one of the things that we didn't know very much about was the virus itself. And actually, most of the viral data at the time was not open. There was only, in mid-February, there was only 4 virus genomes that were available for researchers across the world to analyze. All of the other genomes were locked down inside public health institutes, and they were not shared with researchers at all. So one of the first things that we did, and this is work from our partners in Germany and Belgium, with collaborators in Australia and the US, was to build open source and actually completely open data analytics pipelines for the viral genomes. And they did this on a cloud infrastructure that's actually open to the world. So also researchers in resource poor settings, like in Africa, could access and work with these genomes. In the beginning, it was a very rapid response with only 4 genomes to demonstrate the feasibility. But actually, as you started to work in the open, we saw a large push for open viral data. And today, maybe 70% of the open COVID or coronavirus genomes are pushed through this infrastructure. So I think that's a really strong testament to the value of open science and open source approaches. And as a byproduct of that, of course, you get complete transparency and reproducibility, because people can go forensic on the details of the analysis pipeline and really understand the science behind the analysis. A lot of this is published. If you're interested in the details, you can have a look at our webpage, and there are actually some really interesting webinars around this. Another interesting part of the response, bringing together people across Europe, was actually a biohackathon. So in the first couple of weeks of April, we supported and mounted an international biohackathon. So bringing together scientists, software developers, and data experts to work on the data during 2 weeks of April. And there was a lot of both interesting results coming out of that, but actually also quite a lot of open and sort of publishable analytics workflows, as we tend to call them in life science. All of that's been published, and one of the things that we really managed to push out within those 2 weeks was a registry of open workflows that's then been sort of the centerpiece of the software response. So I think that's, again, it shows the value of bringing together people in a sort of easy to collaborate setting. And given the opportunity to collaborate and work openly, a lot of people are prepared to chip in not only work time, but actually some of their spare time. So it ran over weekends, for instance. So in that, I think I've given you a flavor of what we do, and really I like to think about what we do as making connections. So we have 23 members, 23 nodes across Europe. Right now we have about 55 different what we call commission services, but different projects in flight to connect the services between these countries. And in total, that's several hundreds of national teams working on these projects. And every line in this little diagram is essentially connecting services. But actually, if you think about it, what it really is, it's connecting people between these countries and helping people to work together. And so the core of what we do is, I think, is really about enabling that collaboration between our experts in the member states. And if you think about open software, then I think that an open source, it really sits at the core of what we do. So what we need is to enable a very large number of organizations to bring collectively developed services into their local platform. And one of the things that we get from open source is a really low barrier to uptake. There isn't any escrow mechanism, there is no sort of downstream questions of licensing. It allows organizations to take on these services and the products, knowing that they can maintain them and work with them for a long time. We also need the organization to trust the services, and obviously open source and the transparency it gives is a really good mechanism for quality control, especially when you have a strong and active developer community around the solutions, then it really drives quality control. But maybe most importantly, I think what we need and what open source gives us is an opportunity for people to work together across institution and across national boundaries without having to worry about barriers to collaboration like ownership or IP or downstream sort of product management. But you can really drive that as a community. And in the science sphere and the sort of international collaborative science, those things are important blockers, and if you remove them by embracing open source, then you can really help to drive these collaborations. So like the previous talk, nothing of this happens at random, and of course you have to work with and for the community to make this happen. One of the things that we've done sort of over many years, and I think we've capitalized on now in the coronavirus response, is really to look at how we can make simple recommendations for researchers to embrace open source and adopt sort of open software. We have some simple recommendations that have been rolling out in hackathons and in community events. But actually the paper, which is a paper with a very large number of authors, one of the most interesting parts of the paper is actually a long appendix with counter arguments and sort of helping people to have the dialogue within their organization about why you should publish your software openly, and how and what type of licenses and what are the potential problem with licenses and how you overcome those problems. So you have to be very practically oriented, and I think you really have to equip a large number of individuals with the arguments that help them to take good decisions. And maybe that's a big difference to, for instance, Volvo, where you have a strong line organization, you work within one organization. We need to find models that really work across a large number of organizations, because we can't really sort of trust or work with the traditional line management. So it's very community oriented. So if you think about it, and this is really how I think about it, and I think this is the basis on which we could mount a very rapid response to the corona crisis. So within a couple of weeks, we could start to share data. It is really our collaborative European community and the way we have over many years been able to bring together these experts across Europe. Obviously, this year we have had to think very carefully about how we build communities. And I think we have experimented with almost every collaborative platform on the market over the last 8 months to try to find solutions that work in different settings and still keep the community alive. There's a slight delay here on the slides, but I hope we'll get the next slide. We do. And so to wrap it up, I actually wanted to talk about something that has very little to do with software and very much to do with people and fostering collaborations in a multicultural setting. So we have, as I said, we have 23 nodes. We have people all across Europe working together. They come from all different backgrounds. Many of them are scientists, not all of them are scientists. And one of the key things for us have been to find a mechanism to assure that everyone is heard and that people feel safe and trusted. And I think that that was reflected also in the previous talk. And so we have worked hard to develop codes of conduct, or a code of conduct, and some value principles that we essentially expect everyone, regardless of which organization they work for, but if they come and collaborate in one of our projects, we expect them to work within these principles and follow the code of conduct. And so it's one thing to have, again, having the principles, but again, you have to bring out materials and you have to equip individuals with a set of tools to feel that they can actually work and be safe and be respected. And so I think this is where I will end my talk and just make the point that these distributed organizations, bringing together a large number of people from many different countries, many different institutions, really are people organizations. And you have to find ways of embracing that diversity, the richness, and the individuals, and let them feel safe, respected, and give a platform for where actually the technical and the scientific excellence really is at the forefront. And if you do that, you can, I think you can very rapidly achieve some quite spectacular results. And that our sort of rapid response to the COVID would not have happened without all the people on these images. So I think that's a testament to the power of sort of open collaboration on the basis of open source software. So thanks for your attention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Niklas. This is, of course, a topic that I think engages all of us right now to a very large extent. So thank you very much for also bringing your perspective on this and how you work with data in this area. So there are questions, many of them. I will pick two. And so the first question is from Dag, and he asks, has the mindset with regards to corporate proprietary data changed due to COVID-19 compared to before? And do you think that change will remain after?
So I think that's a really good question. The mindset has changed during the pandemic. I'm not sure it will remain. But I can give a few examples. We've seen some corporate data, but I think what we have seen is a willingness by many public institutions to ignore and step away from things that normally are a bit complicated. And during the pandemic, they simply took it on the chin. So I give one example. During the biohackathon, we got donated a very large number of compute cycles from many of our national collaborators from the national supercomputing centers and from national clouds. Normally, they would need to be reimbursed for this. You can't just give away compute and storage resources to researchers from other countries. It's very difficult, obviously, for Spain to give away a large number of compute cycles to researchers from the rest of Europe because it's national funding. During the pandemic, it was very easy. There is no question. You just did what you needed to get done. And I don't think this will remain because it's not a long-term sustainable business model. But I think it's incredibly valuable in the sense that it actually shows what you can achieve if you find mechanism to overcome these impediments. And so I think that will have to be the focus in the next, is see how can we find sustainable way of working in this sort of extraordinary collaborative setting and overcome these barriers. But I think the barriers will be there because they are fundamental.
We at least challenge the squares that were mentioned in the previous talk. So
Absolutely.
very quickly and the final question, are there any upcoming hackathons of the type you mentioned?
There are. We have a very big European biohackathon in a couple of weeks, but I think behind the question is also the question, can I participate? And
yes,
unfortunately, no, so. Because it was oversubscribed when we opened it back in June, and so there will be more hackathons, but the coming ones are actually already oversubscribed with long waiting lists.
So for the person asking, there will be more. Thank
Check
you so
our
much,
webpage.
Niklas. Thank you for joining us, and if you stay with us online but turn off the camera.